Let's get started. So hello and welcome to this session on just what is the new normal African airport experience. My name is Chloë Greenbank. I'm the editor of Regional Gateway, the magazine and media portfolio championing regional, business and secondary airports around the world. I'm also a staff contributor to LARA, the low-fare and regional airlines magazine, and have a background of working in Africa's aviation sector. So, the new normal. The global airport community has faced numerous challenges in recent years, but as we've heard across on the main stage this morning, the current crisis, the current coronavirus pandemic is the worst crisis in the history of flight. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by a panel of African airport leaders to delve deeper into how airports have adapted to this new environment, to learn which measures are here to stay and how airports can continue to navigate their way safely and sustainably through the post-pandemic landscape and beyond. First up, I'd like to introduce Nicolas Deviller from Aéroports de Paris, who is currently serving as the Deputy CEO of Ravinala Airports in Madagascar. Nicolas is going to kickstart this session with a series of slides looking at the hygiene and sanitation processes adopted by ADP and the introduction of corridors between Charles de Gaulle and French overseas territories. I'd just like to remind you all, if you want to, once Nicolas has loaded up his slides, you can double click on them to zoom in. Okay, over to you, Nicolas.
Okay. So I hope that everyone can see the presentation. Chloé, is it okay for you?
Yes, I can see it. Okay,
very good. So hello to everyone, and thank you for organizing this event. So very briefly, I will present two main points that we did during the last weeks in ADP that we have defined and developed in ADP, not only for our airports in France, but also for some other airports, around the world, and especially the ones where we work in Africa. So we can see that today, the situation is a bit messy, because one of the key points, in order for travelers, to take the plane is to make sure that when you arrive at your destination, you can go to your home, you can visit the country where you want to go and what you want to do. But we can see that today, depending on the country, some countries have adopted some specific rules, and some of them you have to make some tests, before flying. Some others you have to make some tests before, after flying, when you arrive. Some other you have a quarantine before. Some of them you have quarantine after. So the situation is not very obvious and for everyone, especially when you take your air tickets, a few days and even a few weeks before flying, because you can make sure that you will have some changes between the time you take your ticket and the time you are going to fly. So it's why we develop the concept of corridors, where we adopt and where we will have exactly the same rules, at the departure point and at the arrival point. So what did we do? First of all, we have seen that in France, specifically between France and some other territories of France in the Indian Ocean, in Africa, especially in La Réunion Island, that there was a very strong need to reconnect, France to this island, because these islands are very vulnerable, because we cannot afford to have some strong cluster developing in the country, in these territories. And in addition, in order to fight against the virus, some very strict conditions have been put, for flights with no more than 250 pax per aircraft, with 14 days quarantine during the crisis, and even in some other places it is still the same. So to define, this concept of corridor, we did work, with all the stakeholders, so especially the people in our airport in Paris, but also with Air France and Air Austral. We did work with French Civil Aviation, with hospitals, with the medical authorities, in La Réunion and also in France, to see what we could do and to work all together what we could do in order to standardize, the process. So we defined the process. I'm going to show you what we did very briefly. And we did a test during the month of June between France and La Réunion Island. So what are the main principles of the process? So first, before flying, you have to make a PCR test 2 or 3 days before flying. Is the first thing. When you arrive at the airport, you have either a thermal camera or other means to take temperature of the travelers, and you need to have a test certificate, so coming from the PCR test, which is done before, and also a questionnaire: who you are, where you go, your telephone number, where you are going to stay. And after the first thing that you can do, you can take your flight, and when you arrive, you have only 5 days quarantine and a PCR test, a few days after arriving. And if the test is negative, you can leave your hotel or your home, and you can go everywhere you want. So it is the initial process, and as I will show you right after, the process quite well, and the main objective is still to remove the quarantine at the arrival, which is done now today. So after 1 month of test, we have seen the following points. First of all, we did we distributed some questionnaires to the passengers to see if they were happy with the test, and they told us most of them that they felt very safe with the process, but that the administrative process was quite long and was taking a lot of time, especially at the arrival. And today, at the end of the experiment, around 80 to 90% of the passengers were doing their test before departure, which is quite good, because when we initiated the process, it was only 25% of the passengers. So the key points for us, for airport, is main, and for health authorities, is to improve this process, and especially through digitalization and to rationalize all the administrative process. So just to give you a quick, very quickly the result. So before applying, the process, we had a rate of importation of cases, of COVID cases, of 0.65%. And with this experiment and with the new process, the rate was much lower. It was around 0.1%, which is around 5 times below, what we were doing before, which is much better. So it's why today, because the first phase of the experiment now is over, since the beginning of the month with the La Réunion Island, there is no more quarantine between France and La Réunion Island. So since we did this, we are in touch with a few other airports, and they came to us, in order to develop the same context set. So with Dubai Airport, Abu Dhabi, Hong Kong, Amman, and we plan to do it as well between Madagascar and La Réunion, and between also some airports which are under the umbrella of ADP Group. So it is it was the first thing of the process. The second thing is how to manage the sanitary process system. So we put in place some specific procedures, and these procedures, after being defined, have been deployed in all airports which are under the umbrella of ADP. All of them, absolutely all of them, so which is more than 25 airports. So it's quite simple. For each process before boarding and after boarding and the arrival, we have defined some specific measures for the parking, for the check-in, for the security, for the boarding, for all the process at the airport. So I'm not going to go into the details of this process. And in addition to this, there are some transversal measures concerning the social distancing, the cleaning and the disinfection, just to give you a few examples. And we put all this together, and all this has been applied, and obviously we have also taken into account the local environment. In some airports, we had to do things a bit differently, so it has been adjusted to each airport. So just to show you, what has been done, for example, for one of the first process, which is the parking and the airport accessibility. And so there is a 1 page per process. And at the end of the day, we have to follow up what is all this process, and to make sure that it's in line with the process which have been defined. So it's why, for each airport, there is just 1 page which summarizes the situation of each process. Is it okay for the car park? Is it okay for the mobility? For the passengers, for the welcome and dispatch, for the check-in, and so on and so on. So we have one page. So I just show you the page that we have used, for Ivato and Nocibe in Madagascar. And this reporting is done once a month, every 2 weeks, or once a month, and it depends of the airport. And we can see that now, it is most of the points are quite in green. And in addition to this process could also be used for all airports, which are EASA, which have adopted, the EASA chapter, which is good, which means that each airport won't have to do, in addition to some other chapters that could be signed, won't have to do, additional things in order to report to the authorities or to anyone else. So just to conclude on this, what we have tried to do, first of all, because in our portfolio of airports, we have very big airports, but also very small airports. It can be deployed absolutely on all airports, whatever is the size of the airport. Small airport or very big airport, from 400,000-500,000 pax to multi-million pax airports. There is absolutely no need to set, a new specific organization to do this. It's what I was saying. It's in line with EASA recommendation, and obviously, it has been tested, with the airline. So it has been tested today with 3 or 4 airlines, and to make sure that there is no problem with the airlines, especially for the process inside of the airport. Thank you to everyone, Chloe.
Nicolas, it's great to see positive steps being taken to getting airports back up and running, but also airlines flying as well. In terms of how the airports have received the corridor program and the sanitation measures, how have the airports reacted, and have there been any sort of big obstacles that going forward you will kind of be able to overcome?
No, so far we didn't face big obstacles, to deploy all this process. I think one of the main things that has to be done is to have all the stakeholders to work all together and to be around the same table. It's one of the key points, because when you do this, you have to avoid one thing. It is to have, I would say, one authority, health authority, after to have civil aviation, after to have the airport, and maybe airlines, not to develop things or process in parallel, and to do, at the end of the day, to do exactly the same thing. And just to give you an example, before we start this sanitation process, what we have seen, for example, the questionnaires were requested to passengers, but not only one. There was 2, 3, 4 questionnaires. One was requested by civil aviation, another one by the airport, another one by the airline, and at the end of the day, it was quite messy. So it is something which is very important. It is to work together to define, what has to be done. It is the first point, and what is necessary also is to work between airports, between the point A and the point B, to define and to work and to go in the same direction.
Yeah, and you mentioned the EASA there, but are you seeing that input or that collaboration from some of the other associations like Airports Council International and IATA? Are you seeing them kind of embracing these measures as well? Yes.
So it's what we have we did during the last week. For all our airports, we have pushed all airports to apply and to sign the EASA chapter. We think it's first, it's very interesting. It will create, it will harmonize, the way we are going to manage the process. And we have seen that during the last weeks that even there are quite a number of airports, not only in Africa, but also in Asia, in South America, who are going to sign this chapter. And we obviously maybe some other chapter, will come from North America and maybe from Asia. But at least to have a common basis for everyone, I think is one of the key.
Yeah, and are the passengers responsive to the testing when you've been testing at the airports? Are the passengers willing to be tested, or have you come across?
The passenger are quite. I can tell you, the passenger are very happy, because you have the security, safety. Now you have all the sanitation process. So it's something that comes in addition. But at least we must gain the confidence of the travelers, and if we want to gain the confidence, we have to be concrete and we have to show something. And by doing this kind of thing, passengers, before taking the flight, can say, oh, something is done before I fly. And we can avoid, because in some countries, we can see that even if you only have 1 passenger who is tested positive at the arrival, the whole flight will have to be in quarantine. So it's why, it's why it's very important for all the passengers before embarking to make sure that it's not going to be the case, at the arrival, because we never know, as I was saying before, rules can be changed very quickly, and we have to make sure that, when all the test is done before flying, that it's absolutely, there is no, I would say, gap in the testing that is done.
Sure. And you mentioned it's obviously, these solutions are something that are accessible to all size airports. It's a scalable solution. In terms of rolling out across African airports, what are your kind of next steps, if you can, to get these measures rolled out across African airports?
But so today we have deployed this in 3 airports in Africa. It is done in Guinea, Benin, and in Madagascar. So we are very open to work with anyone, with any airport who would like to develop and to reuse. We can provide all the materials, in order to do this. And after, it's a matter of, I would say, local discussions, discussions with local authorities.
Yeah.
On our side, we cannot do it in every country, but we can at least pass the material, to show how it works and what has been the successful, during the last week during our experience.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, if I can come to you, Fundi Sithebe, you've been the Chief Operating Officer for Airports Company South Africa since 2017, overseeing operations and services across the 9 airports in AXA's group portfolio. I understand that the South African government imposed one of the strictest lockdowns back in March, the strictest lockdowns in the world back in March. And we've heard earlier this morning from the World Health Organization how the current situation in South Africa is pretty devastating in terms of infection rates, the cumulative number of infections increasing exponentially. You've managed to get 6 airports, I understand, in the AXA group back up and open and running. Can you just tell us a little bit about the measures you've undertaken to get those airports up and running and how you plan to continue with the other airports in the portfolio?
Thanks very much, Chloe. As of today, we actually have all 9 airports back in operations. We implemented the last 3 today. But what it meant is that in ensuring our overall operational readiness, we had to enhance a number of passenger and aircraft processing subsystems. And this was born out of the fact that we need to rebuild passenger confidence, ensuring the health and wellness of employees, all airport users, and enforcing, obviously, government regulations. So what we had to do as we looked at these different subsystems was put together standard operating procedures. I think you mentioned earlier on, we're using guidelines from ACI, ICAO, World Health Organization, as well as our own Civil Aviation Authority, which emphasized, obviously, on restricted access to the terminal. So perhaps if I can take a step back, we went to the risk as a country, we're using the risk-based approach of the 5 different levels. So we're currently in level 3. So up until we reached level 3 at the beginning of June, we had no scheduled domestic or international flights. At this point in time, we're now in level 3 and we've only got domestic scheduled air traffic. And even then, it's only for passengers that have a specific reason for traveling. So it could be schooling or business, but definitely still not leisure. So what that's allowed for us to do then is really restrict entrance into the terminal buildings to allow for this enhanced passenger processing. So what we've done is we've got mandatory health screening on arrival. So we check your documentation that you're traveling for the right reasons. We then allow you into the terminal only if you're traveling, or I guess if you're accompanying somebody that's traveling. And we obviously check you if you've got the, from a health screening perspective. Once you get inside the terminal, we've enforced self-service check-in with 80%, obviously, that will use self-service check-in, and perhaps 20% of our passengers that will use check-in counters. We've got the perspex screening, we've got physical distancing markers. And what we've also done is we've started implementing what we call COVID monitors. So that is a group of employees that's ensuring that at every given stage, passengers are aware and adhering to the various measures that we've put in place, whether it be social distancing or just assisting with what needs to be done within these processing systems. And obviously a lot more enhanced sanitization, as well as constant disinfection and, of high touch areas. We've also had to amend our security processing, where we really now ensure that passengers self-divest as much as possible, so that we once again avoid passenger and the security staff from any contacts. And then obviously once we get through, from a boarding perspective, we're now boarding, sequentially from the back of the aircraft into the front. So number of enhanced processing. It does mean that that the processing system takes slightly longer. We're now saying 2 hours for domestic flights, and we anticipate that as the easing of lockdown regulations continues and we start to see an increase in passenger numbers, that we might start to see an even longer processing time. But we're just for the moment keeping an eye on that.
Taking things as they come. And in terms of restoring that passenger confidence, you mentioned all these measures that you've implemented, but how have you gone about communicating these measures with the passengers and restoring their confidence to make sure that they understand what will happen when they come to the airports?
So really in partnership with the airlines. So what we've done is, for example, when you come in for your mandatory screening, you are compelled to also produce a health form, health declaration to our health authority. So one of the things that we've done to make it easier is the airlines really insist on self check-in before arrival at the airport. You can also download the form and complete it, so that when you arrive at the airport, instead of completing it afresh, you're just merely handing it over as you get screened. So we've had intensive media campaigns through various platforms on social media, just for our passengers to be aware. And that's the one thing we found very helpful, and lots of signage in the building. Like I said, because there's restricted terminals access as well, we're not using as much external space as we would have. So our parking lot, we've really kind of channeled our passengers that are parking to go through a particular parking spot. And from there, there's also lots of signage just to ease passengers into the processing that's about to come.
Okay. And, in this kind of move to try and get things back to normal, we're hearing a lot about the need to expedite the touchless passenger journey. You've mentioned your self-service solutions that you have. And in many ways, the evolution of digital technology and the emergence of the digital native passenger is helping African airports evolve at pace with the rest of the world. But the rollout of these solutions is expensive. It requires serious investment. And so is this something that AXA is in a position to invest in more? And if so, how are you going to go about getting the funding for that?
So fortunately, Chloe, we had already started, our implementation strategy towards, the entire passenger self-service journey. So like I said, we'd already implemented self-service check-in. We'd already started trialing self-bag drop-off. And incidentally, we were also just about to start with our automated border control, as well as self-boarding. So all that's just meant is we've just had to almost spring it forward a lot quicker. But that investment we were already planning for in any case. But what it does say is that there's other aspects that we had not necessarily thought about before. So things like contactless solutions for parking, your pay and foot, etc. That has also had to really come to the fore. And like you say, given the fact that we've had really minimal revenues from basically the end of March up until means that we really have to look deep in terms of how we fund that. Like I said, because every other measure that we've put in place has also really been an unbudgeted cost. So here we are ensuring that from a regulatory perspective, we are here, but also just making the passenger journey as smooth as possible. Both are costly from limited revenues. So it really is a balancing act, but we're doing our best to make sure that at least we just, get the process going.
Okay, and Lawal Abdullahi, and we can come to you as well. You've been with the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria for around 17 years, and you're currently working as the advisor, managing director under the operations director across 20 or so airports in FAAN's network. Can you just give us a quick sort of overview of the situation in your airports at the moment and how many are up and open again?
All right. Hello all. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Just like the other speakers have spoken, we also developed an SOP based on the new normal in order to ensure passenger confidence and then to give them a guarantee that the airport are safe. The airport is not seen as a mode of transmission. So based on that, we did a procedure with the CAA based on guidelines from the ICAO, CAD, and then the ACI. The procedure is, of course, you should have a face mask before you come to the airport. You should maintain 1.5 minimum distance between passengers. And then we encourage the passengers to check in online, print their boarding pass. Before the COVID, actually, we've been working in trying to introduce some automation in the airport, but the equipment have arrived. But due to the COVID challenge, some of the engineers we needed to come and do the installation could not come. You know, Nigeria has not yet opened our international airspace. So we just commenced domestic operations on the 11th of this month. So based on that, we implemented procedures to minimize contact. Before you enter the terminal building, they have to check your temperature, which should be below 39. If it is above 39, we refer you to further checks, or rather, we ask you to go and get a certificate. We don't conduct tests at the airport, but we can refer you to if your temperature is high, or if you are sneezing, coughing, if you show any sign of sickness, at least to give the passenger confidence. We, as much as possible, try to make sure that we don't share items. The security procedure too has been reviewed, whereby we have minimal contact with between the security officials and the passengers. We've implemented in the sitting procedure also, we also have safe distance in the terminal area. And that is one area that we had a little bit of a challenge, because the sitting arrangement, due to the sitting arrangement, the terminal capacity has drastically reduced. So is that we cannot process many passengers at a time, because you know the procedure starts from the land side to the terminal building and up to the air site. So there should be a flow where you maintain that distance, so that avoid crowding around the terminal. And then, of course, there are disinfectants all over. We have sanitizers around the terminal. The toilets, we try to make them contactless, so that not to touch. And all these things are done, just like they said, despite the challenges in the revenue. You know, the COVID just came up and 97% of our revenue just gone. And then the COVID procedure too, it's quite capital intensive, because you have to implement a lot of measures, like the check-in counters. We have to put shields, the passengers, and then the airline staff during the check-in procedure. We need to we disinfect all bags before they enter the terminal building. And then all surfaces are being cleaned routinely after 30 minutes. So it's the buses up to the boarding, we all ensure that safe distancing.
Okay. And in terms of your airline customers, Lawal, what measures have you adopted to incentivize airlines going forward, and how are you stepping up your route development and marketing efforts at the airports?
Okay, in terms of the airlines, of course, we had series of stakeholders forum. The domestic airlines we have here basically try to compete. They are competing against each other to get the passengers. And then, like I said, due to the issue of the terminal capacity was reduced because we need to implement 1.5 meters separation. So that necessitated us to implement slot system, whereby we cannot have multiple airline boarding at the same time. And of course, the airlines were not too comfortable about that. But the basic issue is that the safety of all passengers has to be guaranteed. And then the passengers need to see that all measures are being put in place to ensure their safety. We've discussed the airline and then of course agreed on certain terms, but it was not easy. It was quite tough. And then, but the passenger traffic is gradually picking up. It's only our domestic route that is open. We don't fly any international.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously, it's becoming increasingly obvious that to avoid the impact of another or the damage caused by another future outbreak, airports need to diversify their incomes to ensure continued revenue streams. We know that the majority of African airports serve less than 1 million passengers, so we need to think beyond aeronautical revenue streams. So airports are increasingly looking at themselves as real estate businesses with runways. And so is this concept of non-passenger revenues, is this something that you're exploring further?
Yes, of course, we're exploring further. You see, we look at even the non-aeronautical revenue that we have, it's still tied to the aeronautical revenue. Like the duty-free shops, the concessionaires, the car park, the toll gates. As long as you don't have passengers, you can get revenue from that. So we realized the airport has a large land area. So we're really looking forward into property development around the airport, trying to see if we could implement like an airport city concept to attract some businesses which will not be subject to aeronautical changes. If we don't pray that there should be another pandemic, but if there is another pandemic, at least we have a revenue stream that we can rely on that will keep us floating. Even though the Nigerian government intends to give the aviation sector intervention, the discussion is still ongoing. Part of the challenge is the airlines. The government has not decided on how to fund the airlines. What kind of intervention are they going to give the airline? Is it in terms of equipment? Is it monetary? Is it kind of tax holiday or rebates? So, and then when you talk about passengers, airport that has less than 1 million passengers, yes, they could not be profitable. But you don't look at it in terms of the profitability of the airport alone. We also look at the airport provides a gateway to the economy of some regions. There are businesses in that region. Without the airport, they cannot thrive. You understand? So obviously, each airport has its own potential. It's not all the airports. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, we have a vast country. So definitely, to reach one point to another by road, it will take you like 2-3 days. So with air connectivity, it makes it easier, it's safer, faster, and easier. So it's not only the profitability of the airport based on the passenger number, but the contribution of the airport to the economy, the socio-economic development of those regions. Because when I say that, just attempt to close the airport and you see what will happen to those regions. Certainly, will close down in those areas. Then another thing too, the business model we operate in those airports needs to change. Each airport has its unique potential due to the environment they are. So definitely, we are looking at exploring all those unique advantages. Like I said, some will have real estate, some could be agriculture, and then some we could even turn them to be like a shopping area, shopping mall, cinema, and other things.
So it's areas to open up, yeah. And if I can come back to all of you and perhaps open up the discussion a little bit, do you think enough is being done in terms of airlines and airports working together? Could there be more collaboration between the two to form greater alliances? I don't know, Fundy, perhaps that's something you might.
I don't think so.
So I think if there's one thing that we've learned in this journey is that collaboration is just so critical. I am of the view that previously, before COVID, hit us, we were always, you know, kind of working in parallel. So this has really forced us to integrate and make sure that, you know, because we're all impacted and greatly affected in the same way, that we need to work together and bringing all our standard operating procedures together. But most importantly, we have the same common desire of increasing passenger confidence and thereby bringing, you know, air traffic back to as normal as can be. We know that normal is not going to be normal for another 2 to 3 years. So in this particular instance, we've worked incredibly well, incredibly well. I'm busy answering on the side. The one thing though that the airlines are busy saying that, you know, just from an economics perspective, we need to move to the next level of unlocking, you know, tourist travel. We need to unlock international travel, etc. So what we've done is we've got an aviation industry body that meets often and puts together, I guess, a common justification that goes through to the national level for then a debate on what makes sense or what doesn't make sense. But obviously, I think sometimes what happens is national perspective and a government imperative might be somewhat different from an industry perspective. So we're all on the same boat in this, on this side, ensuring that as soon as possible, we can really see airport operations and traffic resume back to, you know, as much as what we had before. But a great lesson for me this time around. We've worked very well with our airlines.
Yeah, good. And I mean, we can dedicate a whole session to SATURN, the single African air transport market. You know, its implementation is frequently described as key to liberalising Africa's air transport market, and it's billed as being a driving force behind the continent's economic growth. So is it fair to say that SATURN is more critical than ever for the recovery of Africa's aviation and airport community going forward? Perhaps Lawal or Nicolas, perhaps you have some thoughts on that?
Again?
Just the implementation of SATURN, is it more critical than ever in the post-pandemic landscape?
Of course, it's more critical than ever now, especially now that most of the European countries, Asia and America, most other countries, they've us. And you know, Africa has the poorest connectivity despite the landmass and the population. So the SATURN will give us a great opportunity to have this inter-African connectivity, which will also help trade and other services to grow within Africa. And of course, you can't estimate the economic development it's also going to bring to Africa. I believe there is no better time than now for African countries to quickly implement the SATURN. It will greatly improve our passenger traffic. It will greatly improve the connectivity, like I said before, and then enable trade within African countries. So the EU has to speed up this process, and then we also expect the airlines to start developing their business model, to review their business model in order to suit that SATURN. Otherwise, other carriers from other countries will come up and form an alliance and take advantage of it. So the issue of the capital flight, because mostly if you have like in Nigeria, 80% of the international ticket sales is to other foreign airlines. So, and then of course, if they sell, there is going to be capital flight. We have scarcity of foreign resources, and then the airlines keep taking the foreign resources out of it. So it's really, really critical for us to review that and have it implemented.
Okay. And just before we wrap up, so I know John's going to jump on soon and tell us time is up, but earlier this year, passenger numbers were forecast to double on the continent over the next 20 years. ACI were saying that passenger traffic will reach 450 million by 2040. So if I can ask each of you just quickly, is that something that you still think the industry is on course to achieve? And what step changes would you like to see as we emerge from this crisis? Nicolas, if we can come to you first.
Yes, so first of all, very, very quickly, I fully agree with what has been said before concerning the collaboration with the airline. And also, and I think it was one of the weak points in Africa, it is the connectivity inside of Africa. And I think by increasing and facilitating the connectivity, you know, by removing, you know, some of the barriers that we all know, you know, it will speed up, you know, the recovery process, you know, after after the COVID. And after more globally, I think, yes, I'm very optimistic. Why I'm very optimistic? Because when you look at the situation, you only have today 15 to 20% of the people in the world who flies. Only 20%. So we can see that there is still 80% of the people, maybe one day or tomorrow morning, would like to fly. So I cannot imagine that for which reason, the after COVID will be much worse than the before COVID. Obviously, in the coming 1, 2 or 3 years, 4 years, it will be very tough. And it will be really tough for two reasons. First, because we'll have less revenues, for sector. It's the first thing. And the second thing, we also have to prepare the future. It means that there's some investment to be done in our airports, which are very capital intensive. We cannot stop everything and to say, okay, we come back in 4 years to see what's going on. No, it's going to be too late. So if we want to be ready, to accommodate, passengers in 3 or 4 years, we have to do this. And but we'll be limited by our finance. The only thing for me that could be very difficult to deal with, but I cannot believe that it will be in place for years. It is these distancing measures. So if we say that by tomorrow morning in airports or for airlines, it is exactly the same thing. We need to have 1 meter or 2 meters between two passengers. We will have to multiply, the size of our assets by 2. So it's going to be very tough. But for the rest, no, I'm very optimistic that the trend should be exactly the same. I think in the coming years, in the coming 10 years or 15 years. Yes.
Great. And Fundy, if we can come to you, what step changes would you like to see?
So perhaps also still linking it to the SATURN conversation, Chloe. So I definitely agree that I think now is the time to really fast track every implementation plan that we could towards SATURN. However, that's the one leg in terms of having a discussion, but equally our infrastructure has got to be ready to facilitate that growth. And I think that just within the Africa region as a whole, we still have a way to go. So somehow we need to have this parallel conversation going. And like I think Nicolas was saying, that with capex projects, infrastructure projects of the size, one, they're very capex heavy, very capital intensive, but they also take time. So we are caught in between a rock and a hard place to ensure that we start to increase and restore those passenger numbers to really achieve those growth rates that we see. However, the infrastructure is probably a couple of years behind. There's definitely a lag. So at some stage, one will kind of grow at a far bigger growth level than the others keeping up. So it's got to be a very, very fine balance. And I always say, I'm getting my backside kicked on the side to say, why is AXA stopping all the capex projects? Remember, we're also in a very heavily regulated industry. So it becomes very difficult for any airport company or any airports operator where the numbers in terms of forecasting and what you had initially based your business case on have changed, to still then go back to the economic regulator to ask for that same amount. So it's a very tough one to balance. So yes, we would love to put in the infrastructure now while we're still in the quiet space. But when you don't have the revenues and when the economic regulator cannot see justification of increasing tariffs because of this limited movement, you're caught in between a rock and a hard place about how you're going to finance that infrastructure. So I think we are going to have to look deep. I think we are going to have to look at various ways of how we ensure that our capex delivery still matches that demand that's going to be coming through to the next 3 to 4 years. I still don't know how, but that's how we need to, I guess, apply our minds to some of the thinking, future plans.
Okay, and Lawal, quickly, we can come to you for your closing points.
Just like you said, okay, we are actually even looking at reviewing our passenger service charge. Nigeria has not increased our passenger service charge for the past 5 years. And then due to the challenges of the COVID operations, we need more revenue stream to enable us meet up with the demand and to enable us build that passenger confidence, because the passengers need to have the confidence that the airports are safe and they are not seen as a means of contamination or spreading of the virus. You know, we all look at it, people look at the aviation sector as the mode of the transmission of the virus. So we really need to work hard in order for us to be able to give that confidence. And then for us to do that, that is also capital intensive. So we are increasing our, not much, our passenger service charge, and then hoping that we will be able to improve the services. And then, of course, not praying for another pandemic, but also to prepare for another pandemic. Once we've been able to stabilize some of these streams, I'm sure we'll look at it and review it. And if it is possible, it will come down.
Okay, great. Thank you. I can see John sitting there waiting for us all. Thank you, Fundi Sithebe, Lawal B. Thank you very much for your